A single pig can consume 2 pounds of uncooked flesh every minute. Hence the expression, as greedy as a pig.
Returning from breakfast at a lodge in Yellowstone, my son and I came upon a man who was photographing a bison that was walking through the parking lot. We decided to take a closer look ourselves. While my son was beholding the beast, park workers walking on the other side of the lot suggested we give the animal a little more room. I thought that was reasonable. As I turned back to gather my son, I saw that I was too late. He was running directly for me with the bison in pursuit. Not thinking, I started running directly for him. The bison intercepted before I did. It lowered its horn and ripped a hole in his t-shirt and gave him a nasty abrasion on his back. Fortunately, my son was short enough and light enough to avoid being hooked and thrown. It was then that I grabbed him and immediately turned right. Chance would have it that someone left a cabin door open. I ran past the beds and into the bathroom, expecting our friend to follow. After hearing nothing for a minute or so, I cracked the bathroom door open, only to find Buff still on station. He eventually decided to wander off. We then had the opportunity of meeting most of the rangers within a mile of us. My son's sense of humor didn't return for quite some time. Alright, so I was coming back from my vacation in a car. My dad wanted to pee. There was no bathroom, so he went behind a tree. After that, he felt like going to poop, so he went further in. When he finished, as he was coming back, he stepped on a branch, and it probably hit a beehive, and literally, they all went after him. He went running back to the car, opened the door and screamed, "Do something." I was in the car for like 5 seconds, trying to process what just happened, and when I was doing that, the bees went into the car. My mum, my brother and I went running in a straight line for our dear lives. I was the only one with a phone, and I was actually barefoot, so I also had to be careful where I was stepping. My dad went in the opposite direction. The bees were on our hair and our ears. It was terrifying. When we got all the bees off us, we were screaming for help until one car stopped and they took us to the hospital. That's when I saw my dad, nearly passed out on the side of the road, with a man blowing all the bees off with a blanket. When we arrived, my dad was in a critical state. His throat was closing. He was pallid, eyes wide open. I will never forget that face. Thankfully, they gave him a bunch of medicine. He had a tube on his pee-pee for the pee, and an adult diaper because he couldn't stand up. But they transferred him to another hospital. And on the way to the other hospital is when I started to feel terrible. Couldn't drink a sip of water without vomiting all over the place. I was only one night in the hospital. My dad is way better now and he can actually talk. He's still in the hospital for observation. They were actually putting him in intensive care, but he got better and they moved him into intermediary care. And he got even better. Now he's just in a normal room. He'll be fine, but this was definitely one of the worst and scariest days of my life. This is one of the craziest turns of events in my life. Walking home when I was 17 from my friend's house after crashing at his place. About a 1.5 mile walk. 2 dogs run up. I take out my headphones to say hi. The boxer breed attacks me, knocks me into a ditch on the side of the road. I look up in time to see him lunge at me. I put my arm up. I get scratches all over it. Dog latches onto my leg. I kick it in the face multiple times till he lets go. A car has seen this happening, honks the horn for me to dive in. Back door opens and I dive in. Car full of Jehovah's Witnesses, coming back from church. I had landed into the laps of 3 ladies. One tells me that we went to elementary school together. I say hi, but please get me to the ER. I'm bleeding pretty bad. They watch the dog go back to the house, the owner letting him inside. I call my mum and let her know. She doesn't believe me, so I tell her I'll meet her at the ER. Get wheelchaired into the ER. Mum comes in and freaks out. I have a big bite on my leg, scratches bleeding on my arm. Takes 6 of those saline cleaning sprays to clean it up. Cops are called. I give a statement. We go back to the house. Owner answers and says that Hannibal would never do that. Yeah, the dog was named Hannibal. Hannibal lunges towards me when he sees me. Gets put back inside. Cop says,
Yeah, I've seen enough.
we are going to court because owner doesn't want to pay damages and medical bills. Apparently, they had a breeding license and didn't want to lose it. I feel slightly bad and don't want the dog to be put down. And if they are poor, this could ruin the owners. Cop comes to my house day before the trial. Apparently, he checked the place out and they had about 6 boxer breed dogs in an enclosure of about 15 by 15 foot cage. They've been selling the dogs to a dude in New York who apparently has been a person of interest in a dog fighting ring. Now I'm pissed. Bitch is gonna pay. So yeah, went to court, got paid. Her operation got shut down, lost her license, etc. Never found out what happened to the New York guy. But I feel like I did something good. So, when I turned 18, legal drinking age in Australia, my friends and I used to go drink regularly at this sports bar. It was connected to a pokies place, slot machines, and a TAB, a place to place bets on horse racing, etc. I explain all this because from reading a lot of stories from other countries, I realize maybe we don't do things the same way you all do internationally. Anyway, this sports bar was basically round back of this larger establishment, and next door to it was a large private high school campus. One night, me and my cousin, actually my step cousin, but we were a hell of a lot closer than any of my real cousins, we were drinking jugs of beer at said sports bar. My memory is a bit hazy, but I'm pretty sure it was summer, and for whatever reason, it was just the 2 of us. I was into sculling beer at the time, hence the jugs, so we were pretty smashed. He suddenly gets a bit nostalgic for his high school years, and asks me if I want to go wander his old high school. He is a year older than me, so maybe that's why. Being a public school boy who never had seen his school, I say why not. I was always up for an adventure. So we head out to the neighbouring property that is and was his old high school. We jump the gate and start walking up this unnecessarily long driveway leading up to the school. These are drunken memories, so I actually have no idea if this was the main entrance or whatnot. I just remember a long, asphalted driveway with a heap of trees lining it. As we are walking along, we see this long-ass stick up ahead, but as we get closer, we notice through our drunken haze that it seemed to be moving. Then, we hear this sharp hiss and notice that this long-ass stick is charging right for us. We sober up enough to notice that it is a huge brown snake. For non-Australians, this might not sound so terrifying, but where I'm from, it's drilled into you that you don't mess with brown snakes. They're actually one of Australia's most venomous snakes, and this one was headed right for us with purpose. These snakes are aggressive, live in populated areas, and can drop a man in minutes. All according to a website I just looked up to make sure I'm not talking shit. Anyway, me and Cuz, realizing pretty quick how much danger we were in, hightailed it out of there. I'm pretty sure we were screaming like schoolgirls, but the memory is a bit hazy. To be honest, there's no way to tell how close it was to getting to us. We may have been in real danger, or it may have just been trying to intimidate us. We will just never know. But I'm pretty sure it was a close call. And also, never let the truth get in the way of a good story. I almost had my ankles broken by a hungry pig a few years back on a farm. I was warned by my boss not to be even a few minutes late feeding him, and his wife promptly lifted her skirt to the knees to show me this horrible roped scar that was nearly a foot long. Apparently, that was how they learned he was potentially deadly, but they ran a rescue farm for unwanted animals, so... The only day they were all out of town, I was swarmed with their army of ducks in the inner barn on my way to the pig pen with the food. I had to tiptoe around these feathered jerks that absolutely weren't afraid of being stepped on at all, and it genuinely sucks to be an anxious, empathetic animal lover, because fuck. I finally got to the pig pen and shut the door, which took a second with the ducks trying to shove through. And when I turned away from the door, I had maybe 2 seconds to process the giant pig barreling at me with its head twisted to the side and its jaws open, aimed at my ankle. And the nightmare incarnate was screaming that movie-style pig scream. Nah, I literally launched at and climbed the walls of the barn with a bucket of feed still in the crook of my arm. And all those marvelous panic thoughts were reminding me that pigs will eat people if they fucking want to. And then I remembered the bucket and dropped it. I slipped through the door with more duck shoving, but frantically and probably a lot less kindly. And I plopped down on the nasty floor and thanked my lucky stars. So, brace yourself. This one is weird. I used to travel for hospital work. Super fun, highly recommend it. Usually 13-week contracts. One contract I was in Honolulu, Hawaii, which was amazing. I swam daily and hiked a lot. One such hike, I decided to go up the mountain right behind the city. When you're on Waikiki Beach, look directly inland. That big mountain that's almost always got cloud cover and a rainbow. That's what I climbed. On the way back down, I came across a mother hen and about 6 chicks. Like chickens. In the jungle. Totally out of left field. I didn't press, as they took off into the woods. So I went to work and asked some of my co-workers. They responded, "Oh, those are jungle fowl. Don't mess with them." Jungle fowl? Come on, man. I know they're feral chickens, but like, I grew up with chickens. We used to have roosters too. They'd protect the hens from foxes and raccoons. Problem was, they'd protect the hens from us too. We used to have a rooster we literally named Nightmare. I can handle a chicken, even an angry one. Next hike, I decide I'm going to Manoa Falls by taking a crazy way out of the way route. Total hike length was 12-ish miles. Roughly halfway through the hike, I run into some switchbacks going up a steep hill. I reach the top, and I see him. A rooster and his flock of hens. They're all crossing the path behind him. And he looks at me and gets this "it's go time" look. He charges right at me. He's not too big, so I'm like, yeah, whatever. When a rooster attacks, they try to scratch you with these spurs they grow out of the backs of their feet as they fly right at you. So you kind of push them off and they get the message and give you right of way. At least, that's how it should go. This guy kept coming at me, relentlessly. So I start backing off, getting away from the hens, so he'd feel less threatened. But he still kept coming. We fought backwards, down 3 layers of switchbacks, for what felt like half an hour. I'm sure it was only a few minutes. And finally, I get to a point where I'm thinking I'm going to have to kill this thing to get it off my case. And something strange happened. The very moment I decided this, he suddenly stopped. We sort of stood there, looking at one another for a moment. Then he kind of gives a like, yeah, that's right. And he runs off up the hill, leaving me all scratched up. So I sat there for a few to give them some space, and decided that since I'm halfway through, I might as well finish the hike. On the way, I saw other hikers look at me, to which I responded, "Oh man, don't mess with the jungle fowl." This happened to me in the Gold Coast, Australia. It was around 2003, I believe. My family and I were visiting one of the many beautiful beaches for the day, and at the time were quite avid open water swimmers. As the beach was very busy that day, we wandered a little further south and found a nice quiet spot. It was a little ways back from the beach itself. The water flowed via a narrow stream from the ocean and opened up into a very deep inlet. We spent a few hours paddling on the shoreline, enjoying the peace and quiet. Perhaps we should have stopped to wonder why we were the only people enjoying this particular swimming spot. After a while we stopped for some lunch, and after finishing a nice feed, we returned to the water again. My mother and I, being quite the fitness fanatics at the time, decided we would challenge each other to a race across the inlet. So off we went. About halfway across, I started feeling kind of wrong. I can't explain what I felt in that moment. It wasn't fear. It wasn't panic. I just felt like I needed to get to that shoreline. I'm not sure if my mother felt the same thing or if she was just taking our race a little too seriously, but her pace quickened too. When we got to the other side, we climbed up onto the shore, ready to start the walk back around to where we left the rest of the family. We were talking, laughing, when suddenly my mother fell silent, and her gaze fixed upon something up ahead. I followed her gaze and noticed a sign that had not been visible from the other side where we had been swimming. I felt my body tense up as I read the sign. Bull sharks inhabit this inlet. Swimming strictly prohibited. A cold fear washed over me. For those of you unaware, bull sharks are among the most aggressive species of shark. Most sharks will stay away from you, being very shy creatures by nature. Bull sharks, however, are extremely territorial and are far more likely to rip you apart entirely unprovoked. 2 weeks later, I read in the paper that an 80-year-old man was killed in a bull shark attack swimming in that exact same spot. It haunts me to this day, thinking back to that moment, thinking how easily that death could have been us, thinking how very probable it is that it was almost us. The two of us, flailing atop deep, dark water, dozens of pairs of beady black eyes staring up at us, any one of them ready and waiting to grab us without a second's hesitation and drag us down into the depths. Looking back, I cannot believe we actually went out there. Yet, there we were, helpless, exposed and vulnerable, without a clue in the world. Absolutely no idea what was down there. So, I've had a lot of jobs in my time. Didn't really see the point of higher education when I was younger, so I didn't really do a lot of glamorous jobs. Kind of regret that now at times, but you just gotta keep going and see how it all turns out. Keep adapting, it's all experience. Maybe it'll work out, maybe it won't, but at least I have some interesting experiences to talk about. Anyways, one of these many jobs on my resume was as a door-to-door salesman, or as my dodgy direct marketing company called us, a direct sales consultant. It was pretty sus. Supposedly we worked on behalf of a charity, the Heart Research Institute from memory. So we could take donations in a donation tin, as well as sell questionable goods. Reason why this was good was that we could try to sell to residential areas, as well as commercial and industrial. If we were just door-to-door salesmen without the charity, we wouldn't be able to do as such. I used to work 60 hours a week and make barely $200 to $400 a week, all while paying my own travel costs. But I don't know, I think for the life experience I got from it, it was kind of worth it. It definitely helped my social skills and put some points into my speech skill. I only lasted 6 months, but it felt a lot longer. 1 month, we were to work in this kind of not so safe area, if I'm putting it lightly. We were given territories to work every week, and this month, it was sunshine in St. Albans. Don't know what it's like now, but back then it was real rough. I knew people out that way from all the parties and raves I used to go to, so whilst I was apprehensive, I wasn't too worried. Plus, I drove, so we wouldn't be stuck using public transport after dark. Anyways, here I am, clearing my territory, going house to house. We generally worked in pairs, clearing blocks in alternate directions. So I'm going along, when I come to this house with a high sheet metal fence. I go to the gate and notice it has a "Beware of the Dog" sign scratched out. I look through the gap in the gate and notice that further back there is another cage-type gate leading to the backyard. Behind this gate is 2 to 3 tough-looking pit bulls. I guess this is why the sign was scratched out, so as not to draw attention to them, as they were either illegal, banned, or heavily regulated at the time. So being satisfied with my assessment, I let myself in and head towards the front door with my goods. As I get to the steps leading up to the cement front porch, I hear a low growl from in front of me. Then, to my horror, I see this pit bull slowly stand from its bed next to the front door and make its way towards me, growling all the while. Not like just an intimidation growl either. There was a definiteness to it. I started backing away slowly, knowing not to run, mumbling something stupid like, "We can work this out, I'm leaving." All the while this dog continues to advance on me. I suddenly turn ever so slightly, and then there is this explosion of action, noise, and pain. The dog lunged at my leg and took a bite. I managed to disengage somehow and jumped up to cling to the railing that circled the front porch. All the while the dog is barking and snapping at me. Luckily the owner was home and comes out to see what the commotion was. I don't really remember the next part, but next thing I know I was in his house with him apologizing and offering me a beer to calm my nerves. Being fairly shaken up, I take it. And he proceeds to ask me about what I was doing there and what I'm selling. So weirdly, I go into my sales pitch and he proceeds to make a fairly generous donation to my charity tin. The owner then goes on to explain that I got off lightly. The dog in front was a coward and would only attack someone if they turned their back. I turned slightly to the left, so it took its opportunity, but didn't latch on for the same reason. He keeps trying to offer me more beer, even weed, but I had to drive over an hour back at the end of the day, with the people I was responsible for, so I declined. After retelling this story to a coworker, they told me that he was only so nice because of the illegality of the dogs and how much trouble he'd be in if someone found out. I was in too much shock to even think about it at the time. I got away pretty lucky with only a hole in my suit leg, some scratches, and a great story to share. So, to any of my fellow direct sales consultants out there, if you see a gate with a "Beware of the Dog" sign scratched out, yet there are obviously dogs still there, just skip the house. You might not get off as lucky as I did. I'll preface these stories with a little bit of information about the area I live in the United States. I was born in Texas and moved to an area known as the Hill Country when I was about 3. We lived out in the middle of nowhere, and the closest little town was 30 minutes away. This town consisted of a schoolhouse, a post office, a general store, and a volunteer fire department. As you were driving through, if you blinked, you would miss it. There weren't even any stoplights, and the entire area consists of summer camps and game ranches. To get to the big city, you had to drive about an hour away, and it was still a pretty small city compared to what most people consider a large city. The area has a wide variety of different species of animals that can and will kill you if you are unlucky enough to cross paths with them on a bad day. It is not uncommon to see rattlesnakes, coyotes, mountain lions, feral hogs, javelina's hogs, cottonmouth snakes, copperhead snakes, and a myriad of insects that can cause pain and death. People who live in the country know not to pick up anything off the ground with your hands, and to carry a rifle or gun on you when you're going out into the forest or fields. And if you have snake boots, wear them. But we also get careless at times, because when you grow up living with these animals around you, it isn't hard to get jaded and forget. My family's property was a 12-acre ranch where we grew, raised, and hunted our own food. We had a really nice garden, a large chicken coop, goats, rabbits, horses, and multiple deer feeders on the property. The property housed my nuclear family, Mum, Dad, my older brother and myself, and my maternal uncle and his 2 sons, and my grandparents. We all lived on different parts of the property, but we all helped to take care of the animals and gardens. The first experience I had with one of nature's fastest killers was at the age of 7. One of my chores every morning was to feed and water the chickens and rabbits. The chickens were housed in a large coop that was stationary. There was a fence around it where we would let the chickens loose to run around and collect bugs. We had a large billy goat along with a rooster in a large structure to scare away foxes and protect the hens. Inside the coop we built wooden bleachers that sloped up against the south wall of the building. In front of that was their food and water holders. Anyone who has ever had lots of animals will probably know the waterers and feeders I am talking about. They kind of look like a cone. Ours were blue, where the base is a large circle. It then had a metal that ran up to a point at the top where you could pour food down, and it would slowly feed the animals as they ate from the trough at the bottom. There was a large ring at the top to pick it up and move it when necessary. My routine was quite simple. Pick up the waterer, drag it outside, dump the old nasty water out because chickens will roost up on top and poop in their own water, then drag it back inside with the watering hose and fill up the water again. I let it run while I went and filled the feeder up with chicken feed and gave the goat his feed in a separate bowl. I did this every single day before going to feed the rabbits. On this day, I went through the main gate, and as I walked up to the coop, I noticed that all the animals were as high as they could get in the wooden bleachers at the back of the building. I unlatched the main door and called them to come out, but none of them budged. This was really unusual. They usually waited at the door and rushed out as soon as it was opened up. Being 7, I didn't quite understand the warning signs. I knew when the woods were quiet that it meant there was a large predator around. But it was in our chicken house. There was nothing dangerous in there. Giggling to myself about how weird the animals were being, I went over and petted my favorite hen, then the goat, and gave a pat to a few of the others before picking up one of the hens and putting her down on the ground to see if they would all run out into the yard. To my surprise, the hen freaked out and began flapping and jumping her way up onto the wooden perches again. At this point, I just shrugged and hopped down onto the dirt floor. I don't know if it was the vibration of my feet hitting the ground or the fact that I landed right in front of the waterer, but I began to hear a sound I had never heard before. Movies have very distinct sounds for things. A gun cocking, thunder, a sword unsheathing, the sound of a rattlesnake. None of them are accurate, but we associate these sounds with the corresponding event because that is the sound Hollywood has implanted into our brains. So let me tell you that the sound of a rattlesnake is nothing like the movies. The sound I heard was more like when you open a Coke bottle and the built-up pressure starts escaping. It was so close to this sound that I began looking around at my feet to see if I had landed on something pressurized. It didn't make sense, of course. This was the chicken coop, but to my 7-year-old brain, it was the closest thing I could relate to the noise. After thoroughly searching in the intermediate area where I landed, I couldn't find anything. Perplexed, I realized that I really needed to get done with my chores, because I had even more after this, and I didn't want to get in trouble for dawdling. Moving over to the waterer, I grabbed the big ring on the top and lifted it up. The bottom of the waterer is about the size of an adult bike tire in circumference. It was big, especially for a 7-year-old girl with limited upper body strength, and it weighed a lot even before adding water to it. I had to use all my wimpy body to pick it up and move it over the door frame to the yard before I could drag it the rest of the way to the water hose. As soon as I lifted it up, however, I stopped dead in my tracks. One of the largest rattlesnakes I have ever seen was curled up the entire circumference of the base of the waterer. The sound made sense now. The head pointed towards me in a striking pose as it coiled in on itself. I didn't know what to do. Normally I was told to jump as far away as possible and then run as fast as you can. If you could jump up onto something that was high enough, that was also an option. Or if you had something to pin the head down with, you could try your luck with that as well. All these ideas shot through my head lightning fast, and all were dismissed immediately. It was taking every ounce of my strength to keep the waterer held up. There was no way I could jump or run with it. I considered jumping backwards onto the wooden rungs that lined the back of the coop, but again, I knew I would never make it holding the massive object filled with water. I know it is cliché to say that it seemed like forever, but was only a few minutes. But that is sort of how it went down. Honestly, I couldn't tell you how long I was standing there, staring at this rattlesnake, as it continued to coil endlessly in front of me. Eventually, I made a decision, one that probably saved my life and the lives of some of our livestock that day. I dropped the waterer. Just let it go. Watched as it landed flat on top of the enormous snake, and I ran. I didn't look back. I didn't close the door to the coop or the gate to the yard. I just took off like a bullet. That may have been one of the fastest times I have ever ran up to my grandparents' house and directly into my grandfather's arms. I was bawling, screaming and pointing in the direction of the chicken coop. It took him a few minutes to understand what I was saying before he looked me over for bites. In all my blubbering, he couldn't understand if I had been bitten or if a snake had eaten all our chickens. Because of the commotion, my grandmother came out of the house as my granddad went into the house to grab his rifle before heading down to the chicken coop. I didn't dare go back down there. I was terrified it would kill our animals, kill me, or kill my grandfather. But a few minutes later, we heard a single shot, and after a few minutes of agony, my grandfather came strolling back up the hill with a snake over a large branch. My grandfather was a 6'3" gentle giant, and this snake, at arm length for him, doubled over a branch, reached the ground. It was as big around as my mum's arm, and the head was as large as my little hand. It was still coiling around, trying to grab anything with its tail, its body squeezing the branch. I thought it was still alive at first, even though I knew they continued to move after death, and I screamed thinking he was bringing it up to us. My grandma calmed me down, and after it stopped flopping about, I got to see exactly how long it was. To this day, it is still one of the largest rattlers we have ever killed on the property. After this, it was no longer my job to feed and water the chickens, and I was too terrified collecting eggs from the coop. Hello watchers and listeners, thank you so much for watching. As always, a big thank you to all of the Reddit users who kindly allowed me to use their stories. If you want to help support this channel, you will find links to both my Patreon and my Teespring store in the description below, so feel free to have a look. And the biggest thank you to all of you who continue to support me. I truly do appreciate it. And remember,
Papa loves you.